So it would have been better. The second question was, I saw you...
Tom Friedman.
Oh, Tom Friedman. I mean, give me a break. He's wrong about absolutely everything. I don't know, it's the mystery. It shows the, I mean, I'll just say a word about the Pulitzers, the utter corruption. I don't believe really in journalistic prizes. I better be careful because I think my brother Patrick, and we were very cheered about it, got a rather good prize the other day and was up for another one. So I'll watch my words here. But the Martha Gellhorn Prize he got in England. Le Monde was once edited by a guy called Hubert Beuve-Méry, a very good editor of the French newspaper Le Monde many years ago. And if a journalist on his Le Monde accepted a prize, they got the boot. They got fired. Prizes, there's an issue of Editor and Publisher, I don't know if they still put it out, which is as thick as the phone directory, with prizes that journalists can put in for. It's like an industry. Newspapers used to have, or may still have, departments where they, you know, all the time they're preparing for award. And the Times and these people are grubbing for prizes all the time. And they are dominating. Is
there something specific about Tom Friedman, though? I mean... Well,
I think he irritates a lot of people on the left because he's sort of at a high voltage level of pomposity and cretinism. I mean, that his books are all nonsense. His demands...
But his book has been on the New York Times bestseller list for almost 2 years.
Which shows there are a lot of people who are prepared to buy nonsense. I mean, you know, they buy dog food and they buy nonsense. I mean, you could prepare dog food better and you don't have to read nonsense. I mean, Friedman really is wrong about things. He's wrong in his claims about neoliberalism. He's wrong in saying the world is flat. He was wrong about the war in Iraq. He was wrong, I mean, and brutishly wrong. Not just wrong, brutishly wrong. So a lot of people, not me, I may say, spent a lot of time getting really mad at Tom Friedman, which I think sponsored the question. But he's kind of silly. I think of him like, you know, Flaubert wrote Bouvard and Pécuchet, you know, about two people endlessly spouting nonsense. And, you know, you could take Friedman on the one hand and any one of the other sort of blatherers of the mainstream pundits that occur. So that's the Friedman thing.
We have an email that came in from a 16-year-old, and I want to read it. It's a little bit longer, but I want to read it to you. It says this: I'm 16 years old. I live in Florida. I would really be honored if you would answer a few of my questions and allow me to tell you, as a young American, how this has affected me. I hate politics and politicians. I believe that Machiavelli was basically right. I have no faith in the goodness of humanity. I was born a cynic, and I grow more cynical daily. For 6 years, I've had to watch these malevolent morons, the Bush administration, lie, commit crime after crime, and laugh at the correspondents' dinner while hundreds of people are blown up every day in Iraq and Osama roams free. To top it all off, they are completely incompetent, have no idea how to run a government, and are doing everything possible to destroy this country. The only news I watch anymore are The Daily Show and the Colbert Report. I would consider myself to be pretty far left in my views. I don't support the Republicans because they are evil and the Democrats because they are spineless. He or she goes on. What do you say to that person?
Well, I say a lot of it. The person, is there a male
Liz.
or female? Liz.
I think it's.
I think she. I'm glad.
Yes.
Liz, I think everything, your analysis of the conditions is great, but I don't think you should be a cynic. I think you should have ideals and beliefs, which I think you do, and maybe you're doing yourself injustice by saying you're a cynic. You might be cynical about the pretensions of government, of the Republicans' government as it exists, Republicans and the Democrats, from where you sit in Florida. But that doesn't mean you should be cynical, because to be cynical really, I think, means that you don't have a core of hope and optimism and belief in yourself. Or a belief, you know, in what might change things. And I think change comes from not believing the pretensions of power, or the claims of power, or their claims that they did this or they did that well and it will have good effects and consequences. But to come just to decry and just to, let's say, watch Colbert or the comedy show, you know, the Stewart thing, is limiting. I think you should constantly be, people in the end want to hear a vision that convinces them. You know, whether it's in Florida or Maine or the state of Washington or Arizona or anywhere, that's something that they can relate to. So I often say this to people on the left, to have a kind of ghetto mentality. You don't, if you like form a coalition with people in your community that don't necessarily hold all your beliefs, that if you believe in gay marriage, they don't necessarily believe in gay marriage, or if you believe in this or that and the other thing. But there are certain things you can make common cause on. Right now, most of the country are against the war in Iraq, a majority. They're really against it. You know, and so, and they're not just on the left. They're across the board. Or right now, people feel that the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, is under pressure. You can form common cause with those for an idealistic vision that will move you forward. So I think at the age of 66, 46, as well as what you were, 16, it's wrong to say, I'm cynical. Just cynical. You've got to have a stronger core of positive belief than that.
Berkeley, California.
Hi. This really kind of follows on what you've just answered, but it comes at it from a slightly different perspective. And I think having a British background may give you some real insight. I listened to Neil Conant on PBS. He does a good job. And he was talking to a commentator who I think was really kind of stupid in St. Louis. I assume he was NPR or PBS. And the whole thing was, how do you see these firings of the prosecutors? And I want to tell you how I look at it and then see if you hone in on this. And it's really the educational system in this country and how we look at history and why it's so flawed. People look at the prosecutors and they say the president has a right to nominate them, and also they're at will. They can be terminated any time. But it's like putting a judge in. You put a judge in or a prosecutor, they have the same power. They shouldn't be pulled out for political reasons. And Carol Lamb, the woman in prosecutor in San Diego, said, I don't have time to do all these little cases. I'm going after political corruption, which in that case happened to be Republicans, and she was doing a very good job of it, which means if they want her to go after these other cases, little cases in people coming across the border, give her more money, give her more budget. But I think they use that as an excuse, or could have used it if they'd done it right, to remove her. The average American, even somebody that's college educated, looks at this and says, well, they have a right to remove them. I don't think they have a right to remove people when they're doing their job correctly. That's tampering with the system. And the average American, they want to talk about football, and that's what this commentator in St. Louis did. He wanted to talk about the Cardinals. How stupid to say that people are not interested in this in St. Louis, that they're that stupid that, you know, they're going to regress to talking about football scores. Now, I've said the question, I've set it up. I think you can articulate it better than I can. That's what I have.
Well, on the prosecutor thing, I think I talked about it for a minute before. And it goes also, I mean, you're right, it does go back to what the caller from Florida was saying. It's not cynicism but realism to look at the justice system in the United States and says it is top to bottom political. I mean, I'm not saying there aren't great judges. I'm not saying there aren't decent prosecutors. Although, I mean, it'd be good to count how many decent prosecutors there are. Prosecutors, there are way too many prosecutors who go into politics. You start counting up how many prosecutors there are in politics. It's an awful lot. How many public defenders are there in politics? Not so many. Prosecutors in the system as we now have it, you know, tend to, you know, as I was saying earlier, they administer the justice system in a way that, you know, demands they go after someone, they overcharge to get the plea bargain so they can get this, keep on, you know, keep the system going through. Judges, you know, might have got in, you know, there are some, again, decent, honorable judges, but, you know, judges have got in for political reasons. You know, their careers have been advanced, you know, up through the system, whether it's the federal system or the state system, by systems of political patronage. We live in a judicial system that is politically conditioned and inflected, ultimately, in the protection of, you know, ultimately, the protection of the rich and the, you know, the oppression of the poor is what it really comes down to. And to say it's not true, that is, to, I think, by naive, which is just as much a sin as to be supposedly cynical. That doesn't mean that Ms. Lamb or whatever wasn't, in that particular instance, doing okay. But what I find a little hypocritical now is for all this thundering. I mean, Gonzalez, I'm glad to see he's in trouble. I don't like Gonzalez. He's the man who, you know, says Guantanamo is great. I mean, his actions have been a hideous abuse of constitutional systems, and he should be, you know, put out or impeached or whatever what could be done on that basis. It seems, according to his own assistants, that he's not been entirely forthright or accurate in his remarks about himself, to judge from what the fellow said just yesterday or the day before. But to say for the Democrats to be standing right up there and saying, this is an absolute outrage, this is an impugning and infringement on the normally smooth and partisan-free operations of the U.S. Justice Department and the appointment of U.S. attorneys. I mean, give me a break. Really, that's not true. So, I mean, to say your questions seem to be premised on a disinterested judiciary at some level of theory, which is, I think, conflicted almost entirely in practice.
This emailer wants to know if you will be writing about the Unification Church as you have written about the Church of Scientology. What have you written about Scientology?
Oh, the Scientologists. I'm always in trouble about Scientologists. No, I have no plans to write about the Unification Church, by the way, I don't think. Not that I know of, unless something comes up. The Scientologists, it goes back to what I was saying about cult. You know, if you use the cult word, you know, people are put out. They say, you know, I mean, it's a license to free fire. Now, the Scientologists, you know, come under a heavy attack all the time. Years ago, Time magazine put them on the cover. They put them on as an octopus, as though this octopus was lying across either the world or the United States. And there aren't that many Scientologists, but it was like a huge threat. And oddly enough, the guy who wrote that, I think, libeled me at the same time, actually. I think he mistook me for my brother, a not uncommon event. And I sort of, you know, got to know some of the people in Scientology, Heber Jentz, who's the head of the International Church, and, you know, we had areas of common interest, like, you know, going off to Time magazine, for example. And I felt and feel that I said to people when they say, the Scientologists, how can you possibly even talk to them or have anything to do? I say, you know, there was more evil in 1 second of the history of the Roman Catholic Church than there is in the entire lifetime of Scientology, which only began in like 1954, and the Catholic Church has been going since, you know, a couple of millennia practically, you know, and let's not go into all the things that the Catholic Church has sponsored, starting with the Crusades. And so, let's have a sense of proportion. I don't...
Are you a Scientologist?
No. I'm not a Scientologist at all. I don't really know the whole eschatology and performance of the Scientologists. I do know areas they've done work in, like they've done a lot of work on the CIA. Very creditable work, stuff that's been got by freedom of information. They've done very good work on pharmaceutical companies. Very, very good research, creditable research that stands up. In the late 70s, they did a lot of work on secret army testing, you know, chemical testing. Actually, if you go back and look up the clips, at that time, they put forward their researches. How the U.S. Army chemical outfit and the CIA had done these secret tests, where they were actually, you know, spreading poison gas in subways. In, I think, Sebring, Florida, they were testing things all the time, as they were in the 50s and the 60s, and to this day probably, in which millions of Americans have been poisoned in one way or another. You know, we've probably killed and poisoned, you know, just by nuclear testing, prodigious numbers of people. Absolutely prodigious. The casualty rate from the Cold War in human physical terms in this country is absolutely immense. The Scientologists did good work. Now, I meant to say, well, the Scientologists did that. I'm not going to read that stuff. I have read it, and I've used it, and it stood up. It's very good research. I think demonization of the unusual. A lot of American political culture is saying, you can't think that. You can't go there. You can't like these people. You can't even notice these people. You know, it's meant to be like when these candidates get going, like some poor fellow like Obama, you know, basically the first months of your campaign, a state of systematic denial. You never said anything in favor of labor. You never said anything that might be mildly critical. No, of the state of Israel. You never did this, you never did that. And gradually the elites are satisfied that you might just be respectable enough to run for high office. I always remember years ago, Senator Harold Hughes of Iowa, he was on CBS one time. Years and years ago, he was a very good senator from Iowa. I think he was a former truck driver or something. And they said to him at one point, Senator Hughes, are you a candidate for the nomination? I forget if he's even a Republican or a Democrat, but I think he's probably a Democrat. And he said, when I tell you